So up next, our next speaker is Ricardo Sosa, who is an educator, researcher, and designer. His work utilizes research methodologies across disciplines, and it includes an Indigenous and feminist ethos to strengthen the creative capacities of youth. In this talk, he introduces a few of what he calls controversial ideas about privilege and biases within design. Please welcome Ricardo Sosa.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you. Indeed, my name is Ricardo Sosa. I started as an industrial designer many years ago. And I've moved now into a space of participatory design and design in education, design research in education. And yeah, that's where I'm working at the moment. So I wanted to bring this Korero. Korero means dialogue or conversation in Te Reo Māori. And I wanted to talk about privileges and biases from some of the experiences we've had in recent years here. So I'm located in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Kia ora, everyone, hello. And this is a country of where the original people, Maori, or Tangata Whenua, and a majority of migrants like myself, so-called Taiwi or Tangata Tiriti. And so this is my positionality here as a Mexican, originally from Mexico, and having lived in several countries around the world, Singapore, Australia, and now finally for the last 6 years being in Aotearoa. So this is my pepeha, my way of introducing myself. Kia ora tato, ko te kolote te manga, ko Pátzcuaro te agua, no Mexico ahau, ko Sosa toku whānau, ko Ricardo toku ingoa. So that's basically an acknowledgement of country, the mountains, the lakes, the water that grounds me and my ancestors from that place in Western Mexico. And as I said, I'm a migrant in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that's my position today, that I want to share some ideas with you. And thank you for the invitation. So I'm out of all the experiences we have as researchers, as human beings in this country, one of the things that I've been experiencing as participant, but also as a facilitator, has been this activity, the Privilege Walk. And the Privilege Walk is quite popular, especially in Western countries in the global North. And I've seen ways of doing it that are absolutely wonderful and very useful and very meaningful, very impactful for participants. But unfortunately, I've also seen the Privilege Walk done in not so great ways. And so I thought we would perhaps talk about the Privilege Walk as a very specific instance of the type of activities we do. Also, the reason being because this is an activity that relies on presence and a shared space as a group. And since last year with the pandemic, we've been thinking how to continue our work, especially with youth, how to continue the work remotely. And so we came up with this Miro.com template called the Privilege Walk Game. You can use it in your own workshops. But there were some really interesting conversations in the team and with people outside the project as well on the risks of running something like the Privilege Walk. So I think that's where I want to locate my talk today, the ideas. To talk about some wider issues and wider concepts. So the images you see on the right-hand side is the type of work we do with youth in South Auckland. South Auckland is a hyper-diverse area of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand. And we work, we've been in partnership with this high school for the last 5 years, but we also work outside the formal classroom and the formal curriculum in after-school spaces and we're setting up now a school holiday space as well, so that we can work with the wider community and not only the students in the formal hierarchy of education. And to me, I think one of my best lessons that I've learned in recent years, and I'm still very much a learner, I'm still in the process of learning this, but as a so-called designer, and I use these quotes here to point out that we use these terms to label people, label roles, and sometimes there is a lot of intentionality in that, or sometimes we're not aware of the consequences of using these words. But when it comes to designers, I think these type of conversations are important because they support reflexivity. They allow us to think about who we are and what we do, and what are our biases and our origins, and how those ideas, we project them into what we do. Also, when it comes to stakeholders, so-called stakeholders, I think a lot of people in my field, in participatory design and design research, are not necessarily aware of the politics on a daily basis, on the politics of their work. So this talk seeks to inform and maybe provoke some thoughts around that, and ultimately what we refer to as users, the ethics of our work. So as I said, I'm not here to lecture on these topics. I'm here more to share my own process, my own journey, and to perhaps inspire some questions and some ideas in others. So specifically, because of the time, I want to focus on 3 ideas: empathy, experiences, and participation, because I think we often take them for granted, but hopefully the conversation can go broader than this. For instance, I would like to know, what are the elephant in the room for other people? What are other concepts that people perhaps have taken for granted, or they see taken for granted in their context, and how can we problematize them? So empathy, in many design thinking and design frameworks, empathy is seen as almost like obvious, as an obvious kind of initial step to, and we use definitions or expressions such as wearing someone else's shoes to understand how they feel. And I think there are quite a few problems with empathy and how we use empathy in design. I don't see deeper reflections on what empathy actually is, and should we be pursuing empathy, or is it something else and we are maybe using the term empathy to refer to something else? So my first critique of empathy in design is that often it's used very superficially and very instrumentally. I do see a lot of risks on privacy and appropriation from designers who jump into a project or go to a new community, and they feel they have the authority or the agency to empathize with people. And in that respect, my best kind of response, the best response that I've seen so far is, because I'm in the space of educating future designers, is to have students be empathized with. So to turn the tables and to let them experience, how does it feel when someone comes and wants to empathize with you? And that opens up a lot of conversations with who has the right to claim to empathize or to aim to empathize, with the best intentions, by the way. I'm not criticizing intentions. I think everyone in the field has great intentions, and a lot of these concepts come from very good intentionality. Another one is the reduction. I think empathy reduces experience to private individuals, just to the individual scale of the person. And I think this is highly problematic in some contexts where a lens of individual experience is very limited, and it's good to look at historical and cultural dimensions of shared lived experience rather than trying to empathize with an individual, often a kind of like a persona, like a average or representative person of groups, especially in groups that are hyper diverse. As I mentioned before, this is very, very reductive and very limited. And as a way forward, I also I bring to the table the ideas of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, and his concepts of critical consciousness. And in general, I think that if we connect empathy with solidarity, in my experience, in my projects, that's been a lot more generative and a lot more meaningful. So Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator and social activist and social researcher, and I recommend some of his books are very interesting for designers. In terms of experience, again, we use experience, the word experience. I just used it in the previous slide, and we use it in user experience, and we treat it often experience is treated as a design material, something that we can design with or that we can shape for others. And here, I think that, again, the intention is not wrong, but I think that the emphasis and the angle, sometimes it's quite limited. It brings us to very limited places. So as a way of asking questions about this, I bring the principle of natality by Hannah Arendt, which is, I mean, I can't define it in a few seconds, but essentially the idea that every human being is different, and that every human being brings a potential for creativity and innovation to the world. So instead of design being something that we do to others, I think recognizing the principle of natality and agency in individuals is very important for our work. Plurality, it goes against, in design, it's very common to have kind of like universal concepts. Even the design process is often understood as set, as something that we know how to do. And since the 90s, when I started designing with communities, I understood that no, what we teach in design schools and what we learn as designers in education and practice is just one instance of how we design. And so this idea of vita activa is very important. Hannah Arendt distinguishes between labor, work, and action. And it can be a bit philosophical, the idea, but in essence, I think one of the applicable ideas for design is that design is a type of work. Design is something we do. We build things, we make things, we create systems or services, and we put them out there. So that's a skill, and it's a very good thing to have. But creative action is what people do on an everyday basis. And often we call them non-designers. And I think that there is a problem with that. So a design angle to Hannah Arendt's work is something that I think would benefit and would change a lot of how we teach design in design schools and how we practice design professionally as well. And the third concept is participation, because as I said, I come from a field of original industrial design, and then I moved to interaction design and participatory design. And I think the idea of involving people in decision making is, again, a very good one in terms of intentions, but how it's done and the power dynamics of how we participate and how we invite, even just the act of inviting others to participate is highly problematic. I think often we don't see the problems, and that is kind of the problem. So co-creation, grant-based, bottom-up initiatives, and not only inviting people to give their opinion or to extract information from them, or for us to give them some options and see what they prefer. I think there is still another level in participatory design and co-design to open up the brief to people, what they want to, and there is work to be done there. Going back to Paulo Freire, we use his concept of generative themes. So themes that we bring to the community, and we put these themes out there, fully aware and hoping and knowing that they will take those themes and do something different with them. So these are more provocations that we put out there, instead of having a project and having goals and having a way of doing things, which is how we used to do it in the past, and some people continue to work that way, I think. A commitment to dialogue, and dialogue is a very powerful idea. The latest way that I have to think about this is a concept that comes from Latin America, that is senti pensar, senti pensante. In senti pensante, comes from anthropology and social sciences in Latin America. The idea is that people don't divide this, again, this kind of like Western gap between feeling and knowing, or feeling and thinking, but it's the same holistic, integrated action. And I incorporate this idea of hacer, of to make, to build. And if we listen to people, how they feel, think, and make, that there is a lot of room there for us to learn. And in that respect, I recommend the Zapatistas, the Zapatista movement. They are at the moment touring Europe. They are in many cities in Europe, and just attending some of their forums or reading some of the materials they've published in the last 20 so years can be very, very useful. Thank you. This is my link to my information online about me / design computing. And I look forward to the Q&A and to continue the conversation in the future. Thank you so much.
That was wonderful, Ricardo. Thank you so much. I have to say, I did a little dance when I saw you reference Paulo Freire, because I've been looking a lot to his work, especially as we think about how to scale design education and kind of view design literacy at the same level in which he viewed language literacy, and what that might mean for us. So again, design at the intersections, very relevant.